Welcome, everybody. My name is Lori Peterson. I'm with Diagnostic Learning Services, and so excited for you guys to be here today for our webinar on unlocking accommodations. Eric, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Eric Endlick. I'm the founder of Top College Consultants. I'm a psychologist and educational consultant, and we have a diverse team of consultants helping high school students apply to college nationwide. Primarily, we work with students with learning differences. We also work with some students applying to grad school. Thrilled to
Jonah.
be here with you and Jonah.
Yeah, thank you for having me, both of you. My name is Jonah Fishel. I'm the founder of Next Step Prep. We do test prep, SAT, ACT specifically for kids with learning differences. I've been doing it personally for 10 years full time. So 30, 40, 50 hours a week of just SAT, ACT prep in that time. And I've been focusing on kids with learning differences almost that whole time. But in the past 4 years, it's been exclusively that's the clients we work with.
Awesome. So we're going to be covering a few different things real quick. We've got some slides we're going to go through, and then we're going to open it up to questions. So if you guys have questions along the way, feel free to put them into the comments, and we'll either answer them as we go, or once we finish the slides, we can answer those questions for you. But we're going to talk a lot about standardized testing, college admissions, the transition to college, and then college accommodations. So Jonah, I think that you are going to be up first with some talk about standardized testing.
Yeah, I think I have the sort of the easy questions here tonight because a lot of these questions, which I get all the time, have very objective answers. And I think that the two of you have some questions with much harder answers. So documentation. If your student has a 504 or an IEP already, you're basically good. Because the way that the accommodation process works is you talk to your school, you have to go through a school. And that's basically because the SAT and the ACT, they want to see that your student has a history of accommodations that have been working for them in school. And they want to replicate those accommodations basically as closely as possible. Now, that's not really possible for some parts of the test, right? Because it's just one morning of their life and it's standardized and there's all these different ways that we can't really match their accommodations from school. But if you have a 504 and IEP, you will submit that. And actually, I think I have, would you hit the next slide? I put the answer here, right? Like if you have a 504 and IEP, almost all the time, you'll just be approved with that. Now, you don't have to have a 504 or an IEP already in place. And I talked to a lot of people who the kid basically aged out of their IEP. They had one in elementary school. It was working well. They adjusted to the sort of demands placed on them by the school system, and they don't need it anymore. And so in that case, they say, well, could we get accommodation on the SAT anyway? And the answer is like, probably. There are some documentation that you can submit if you have a diagnosis, particularly from a psychologist, with a little note that says like, yes, it is my professional opinion that on the standardized test, there are some limitations of function. That's the phrase that the SAT uses. If you have that, essentially a doctor's note, then they'll read your application. So that does have to go through the school anyway, even if you don't have a 504 or an IEP. It's just a centralized thing. The guidance counselor, most of the time, or the learning specialist at some schools, is going to submit that paperwork on your behalf. And that's because the school has to provide those accommodations when they actually administer the test. So we're going to cover this a little bit more in some of the other questions in terms of like what's actually possible and what to expect with those accommodations. But if you have a paper trail of your student having some kind of accommodation in school and it working for them, you're going to be okay. This is a very easy one. Do the colleges that you apply to know that the student had accommodations on the ACT or the SAT? No, they don't. They don't know the type or the kind. They also don't know if there were any at all. So all the school reports look the same. Ta-da. How is test prep different for students with learning differences? This is actually pretty significant. So most of the time when you think of test prep, you think of learning the test. And I think that's basically accurate, right? The SAT and the ACT don't really test the same things as we're learning in school. Reading comprehension, sure. But like the way that the math in particular is presented is not really the same as it is in school. So for most students, neurotypical students, when you study the SAT and the ACT, you are focusing on how to not game the test, but how to handle the test and how it's presented. That's not usually true for students with learning differences. There are often significant content gaps that need to be addressed first, or at the very least are more efficient to address first, right? So I see a lot of the students that come to us, they have had some barrier to learning what's on the test in class, right? Whether that was a teacher who isn't following the IEP, or just there's some sort of barrier to their learning, whether that's a structural thing or just takes them longer to get through the same material. There's often a bunch of things that are pretty foundational for the test that they need to brush up on. So my standard approach is we forget all the speed strategy, which is most of what test prep is going quickly, managing time. Basically, any accommodation set that you're going to get is going to include extra time anyway. That's like 50% extra time is baseline. I can think of one person in the past 10 years who had some accommodations and didn't have extra time. Like, it's just sort of standard. So we don't worry about the timing so much. We don't worry about the speed. We go in and we fill in the content first. Now, in particular, right now, what that means is stuff that was glossed over in math during COVID online learning years ago and never really got filled in. We got to go back and fill those in. So it's a very heavy content focus in a way that maybe your students' peers or friends wouldn't be talking about. They'd be talking about how their test prep is different. Yeah. Right now, the ACT generally is better for anyone who has accommodations. There's a couple reasons for that. Number one, the range of accommodations that they offer is better. There are more choices in a way that makes the test more accessible, in my professional opinion. And the data bears that out too. Typically, someone with learning differences, they're going to see a larger score increase when they study for the ACT versus the SAT. There's a lot of confounding factors there, but that's the main conclusion from that data, that study that we did just about 2 years ago. So the ACT has things for multi-day testing, right? You can split the test up over multiple days. So you can take it in a small group. You can take it alone. But also the much more sort of, I would think of serious accommodations like a Braille test or a reader for the test, a person who sits in the room for a student who's visually impaired and reads the test. The ACT has those things and the SAT just doesn't have them. So there is a screen reader on the SAT, but it's bad. It's not good right now. They've been working on it for a year. There's a lot of like pretty serious problems with it. They have extra time on the SAT. That's what they have. And so my general advice is if the accommodation that you're approved for and that you expect is all that your student will need is extra time, either test is fine. Maybe. But if there's anything beyond that, I really don't trust right now, at least the College Board to deliver on that. I think there's some pretty serious concerns there. The screen reader thing in particular is a lawsuit waiting to happen, I think. One wrinkle there is that the ACT is changing this year, the enhanced ACT, they call it, which is some 1984 doublespeak maybe. The enhanced ACT is right now being rolled out digitally. And as with all digital tests, there are some concerns with bugs and glitches and stuff that I think are going to affect accommodations in a big way. Now, right now, you have until next year to just take the new ACT on paper. And so you should do that, whether you have accommodations or not, actually. Just take the paper one. Any insight there, my fellow panelists? This is a pretty fluid situation right now.
No, I totally agree with you.
I
I
defer
like
to
that
you.
the ACT that they have the 2 day option. And I think for kids, when you get that extra time, that's a long time to sit in one day. And so the fact that
That's
the
a
SAT lets you
6-hour
break
test.
up into two is huge. It's huge. So I also agree. And I also think the ACT is a little more lenient in their documentation requirements as far as having just an IEP or a 504 plan. Oftentimes they don't require that formalized documentation of a disability from a doctor or from a psycho ed eval. They'll take your 504 plan or IEP, which is sometimes nice. So yeah, I'm totally on board. I totally agree. I think ACT is a better option.
Yeah, I find myself recommending that far more often than the SAT for our clients. Okay, this is a tough one. So how should students with disabilities decide if they should take the test at all? Now, I happen to think, keep in mind, this is the industry that I'm in, but I happen to think that everyone should try it, take a practice test. right? Because I think, and we'll see if we get any lively discussion from the panel here. I happen to think that a good test score is always a good thing, basically, on a college application. And so if that's something that the student can do while balancing all the other things that they have on their plate, I think it's usually worth it to take the test. That said, there are certainly score ranges that certain schools expect. And so when a student comes to me and they say, I really want to apply to Harvard, and Harvard is expecting 1,500 or higher SAT, or really higher even than that would be good. And the student, I think, if they put in the time to study and they take the test a couple times, is going to end up somewhere even around the 1,350, 1,400 mark. I usually tell them it's not a good use of their time. Now, if there's other schools on the list that like that score range, then it's a different conversation. But typically, if you can sit down and take the test and you can get a score that is within range of your goal score, then I think it's okay. So typically, as a rule of thumb, you can improve a couple hundred points on the SAT, or 5, 6, 7 points on the ACT, given a 2 or 3 month-ish timeline. Take that with a huge grain of salt, because it really, really depends on where you're starting from, right? Students who start closer to average can see more points. It also really depends on the math you've had in school, because the ACT goes through parts of pre-calc. So if you haven't had that class yet, there's a whole big chunk of points, maybe 20% of the math test, that is pretty inaccessible. Like, you could pre-learn that as part of test prep, but it's a big endeavor. And so you might as well just wait. So this is one of the harder things to do. I'm going to say, it depends. It depends on a lot of things.
I want to highlight what you said about the, comparing different schools, that when people are wondering, well, what's a good score? I think I can get a good score. I think I did get a good score. It's all relative to the schools you're applying to. And a score may be very helpful for one college and not really helpful at all for another one. So you got to look at what are those ranges of that students who are getting accepted are landing in. As far as whether to take them at all, I do get some students or parents of students who will say, number one, I'm just not good at standardized tests. I'm doing fine in school, but standardized tests are not my strong suit. And number two, that it's so stressful that it's going to impact their mental health so much to take or prep for the test that it doesn't really outweigh the possible benefits of having a good score, especially if they have a strong transcript to begin with. And I've had the whole range. So I've had students who didn't take a test at all. They just knew upfront, that's not my thing, no interest in taking the test, and still got into every college that they applied to because our list was very carefully curated. We were picking colleges that were a good fit for them in every way. And then I've had the other kind of situation where students had transcripts that really didn't reflect their capabilities, but they nailed it on a standardized test, and that high score got them into schools they never would have gotten into otherwise without the score. Students with very unimpressive overall GPAs who may be very, very bright, but for one reason or another, maybe mental health, maybe other factors, didn't do so great overall in high school, who got into flagship state universities just from that one strong ACT or SAT score.
It happened to me, I did not have a very strong performance in school, but for
There you
whatever
go.
reason, the test always kind of made sense to me. Yeah, it's an interesting case. I think from a practical sense, if you're thinking about doing this with your student at home, the steps you want to take are figure out even a rough list of colleges you're interested in. And you just go online, you just Google, you usually want to Google median SAT score and then the name, because you actually want the range, the interior two quartiles. The common data set will tell you, or Google will just tell you at the top, right? The 25th percentile to the 75th percentile of that school. Just write those down. And that's the goal score. So once you know the schools you're applying to, you can decide if you're in range or not. And the way you would do that is you would look at a recent practice test or a PSAT or a pre-ACT, and this is an art, not a science. You would figure out if you can get from where you are to that goal range on the timeline that you have. There's a lot of factors that go into that. And I mean, I spend probably 10 hours a week doing that with Barrett. And actually, I'm happy to say, I license an assessment from UPenn to do that in order to make recommendations like that. If you would like me to sit down and do that with you step by step and figure out if you're in range of a certain school or not. I'd be happy to do that. If you're here live on this call, I can do that for free. If you're watching the recording, it costs, I got to license it from UPenn, so maybe not so much, but I'd be happy to do that. And I'll drop a link. So if you have specific questions about your student and it depends isn't doing it for you, then I'd be happy to help you with that.
Tonight,
Sure.
really quick before we move on, Jonah, one of the things we were talking about is you were talking earlier about how the school takes care of all that paperwork for the parent, right? What about homeschool parents?
Great question. Okay, so the homeschool parent still has to go. This is complicated because when you sign up for the test, you still have to sign up for a particular test center. And basically everywhere, except in incredibly rural areas, it's still the school that is administering the test. So for the homeschoolers, they actually have to go through the school that they are taking the test at, even if they are not affiliated with the school, which is different. Your high schooler doesn't have to take the SAT at their home school. They could take it somewhere else based on availability. I had a kid last year living in California who had to fly out to Alaska to take the SAT. So it was the closest open seat because he signed up late, even though I reminded him several times. And so those kids have to go through their homeschool to get the accommodations, even if they're taking it somewhere else. The homeschoolers have to go through the test center that they're taking it at. And the reason is just like that is the school that has to provide the accommodations. So they have to make sure that they have the staff, if they need an extra room, if they need technology, whatever, they do that. Yeah.
Great. Thanks.
Good question.
Yeah, and I love working with homeschool students. And for them, as with other students, a test score isn't necessary, can be super helpful. Another data point for colleges to see.
So, what can families do to maximize the chances of getting approved for accommodations on these tests? So, like Jonah had mentioned, paper trail. You need the paper trail. You need that history of needing and receiving these accommodations. I think we got into trouble, however many years ago that was, with the whole college admission scandal when people were paying for a diagnosis to therefore get an accommodation because who wouldn't benefit from more time, right? So now what they want to see is this is something you have been using. You've been getting it or you've been provided and you've actually been taking advantage of it. You've been using it. So that paper trail is super important. If you are a homeschool parent, you still can provide that paper trail. You still can provide a list of accommodations that you have provided or a co-op has provided anytime a test has been given, but that paper trail is super important. It's also really important. What I've noticed, I've been doing this now about 25 years, where we provide a lot of the documentation in the form of a psychoed evaluation. And what we have found is that from time to time, the requirements change. We've gone back and forth between just needing an IEP to needing a full standardized psychoed evaluation, regardless of the IEP. Then it kind of got swung back. So I think depending on when your student is going to be taking one of these tests, making sure that you have the most current documentation guidelines. Again, if you have a student in a public school, your guidance counselor should be able to help you with that, or your 504 coordinator, or your special education coordinator. But it's all available on each of the test websites. So I think just staying in the know, keeping your documentation up to date, those are the key pieces to making sure that you're maximizing your chances of getting those accommodations. So why then do some people not get those accommodations? What we have found is because they lack that history. Kind of like what I was just saying, they don't have that paper trail. Now, here's what I will tell you is that if you do apply for accommodations and you get denied, do not be afraid to appeal. We have appealed 2 and 3 times for students, and we get it. And so if the first time doesn't work, we can appeal. You can get letters from teachers. I had one family where both parents wrote letters, the student wrote a letter, I wrote a letter, they had a teacher write a letter, and lo and behold, she ended up with her extra time on her SAT. So, do not be afraid if you get denied to make that appeal. Just make sure you leave yourself time for that, because obviously all of these steps take time, and we don't want to be pushed right up against the test date.
Yeah,
So make sure
yeah,
you leave
that
enough
was
time for that.
exactly. Because you might need to appeal, you want to build that into your process of applying for
Yeah.
accommodations.
But
You
just
do
and
8
keep the
weeks.
paper trail.
Do you recommend 8 weeks? Or some, I mean, that's not necessarily when people ask me
Yeah.
for a number, that's what I say. I know it's
Yeah, I would
hard.
say
It
8 to
depends.
12. I would say 8 to 12, just in case you have to appeal,
Yeah.
because that, you know, and depending on when in the year it is and how many kids have applied and how many applications they're going through, I would be safe, rather be safe, and 8 to 12.
Shall we go on?
Yeah.
Okay. Should students disclose their disability during the college admissions process? What are the pros and cons? I've done whole talks and articles on this, so I'm going to try to keep it quick. And if you like QR codes, get your phones out because I have several of them. This is the first one, and it links to a blog post on this topic. Short answer is there is no evidence that it's going to help or hurt students across the board automatically. And so we empower students to make that decision. This is a key time for students when they are starting to move into that young adult role. And that's ultimately the student's decision. Colleges don't ask if you have a disability when you're applying, with very rare exceptions where they are asking if you want to apply to a support program. But typically on the application itself, there would be no way for a college to know you have a disability unless you choose to disclose that. There's no evidence that you get extra points or some kind of advantage for disclosing it, or that you're going to be discriminated against for disclosing it. So you might wonder, well, then why would I disclose it if it's not really going to necessarily impact admissions? Well, there might be something on your application that could benefit from explanation, like you had an uneven pattern of grades or an unusual pattern of courses that you took or didn't take because of a disability. That could be something you'd want to explain. If you don't explain something confusing, puzzling, or unusual, colleges are just going to make assumptions. Oh, you decided not to take foreign language. We require foreign language. Sorry, you can't be admitted. Whereas if you explain it, you might get an exception. And then there's a whole other category where students want to write about it in their essay. And many students I've worked with choose to write about their neurodivergence in their essay. They're very proud of it. They feel like it's a key part of their identity, and they've done great in terms of college admissions, sometimes getting into every college they apply to. So again, no evidence that it's going to hurt you, but that's something we really walk through very carefully with students in thinking about it. How can you find disability-friendly colleges? Well, that's a kind of a complex term and concept, but I have put together a database of over 200 colleges that offer supports, learning support programs, autism support programs that go above and beyond the legal minimum. So if you're looking for colleges that do more than just the bare legally required minimum, you can go straight to that link, and it's a sortable website. So if you're just looking for colleges in certain states, you can sort it that way. Also, I put in the cost of these programs. Often they cost a significant amount above and beyond the cost of tuition, and I think it's helpful for families to know what they're signing up for. So, but there's more to kind of assessing whether a college is disability friendly than just seeing if there's a program. And one piece of that is evaluating the disability services. And all colleges, for the most part, have some sort of disability services office. They might call it accessibility, they might call it student success. There's different names for it. If you go to that QR code, you'll see a blog post on a list of 20, I think it might be 25 questions that you can ask disability services. I encourage families to meet with disability services offices when you're touring colleges, when you're building the college list, not after you've committed to the college. Because at that point, if you don't like the services, it's kind of late in the game to say, oops, we picked the wrong college. But if you have separate meetings with disability services when you're touring and exploring colleges, whether it's virtual or in person, you can go through a whole list of questions to get a sense of what the staffing is like, what the process is like, what the college offers, and so on.
So, what documentation then is needed to obtain those accommodations from any one of those disability services offices? And interestingly, um, again, it's college by college, office by office. What's different about colleges, from what we talked about with the SAT and ACT, is that the history there is much less important. If you get diagnosed later on in your career, or your child does in your educational career, and you have been found to have a learning disability or ADHD, where now you feel like you would benefit from those accommodations, that's fine. They're not worried about what you did or didn't do, as long as you have the documentation that shows the functional limitations of a daily living skill, basically. So how does it impact your ability to learn, to read, to write? And so that is where the psychoed evaluation comes in, where you can have that documentation that shows, yes, I have a disability. Here's how it impacts me. Here's the accommodations that I need, and here's why I need these accommodations. Now, if you have a 504 plan or an IEP, absolutely, that can be shared so that they can see kind of what you've been successful with. History is always good, but it's not necessary. And I think that's kind of nice. We have students that come to us halfway through their college career and realize they have a learning disability, and can immediately, once they have that documentation, they can begin receiving accommodation. So you don't need to
Yeah.
prove that history like you do for
I
the
think that's a
standardized tests.
really important point that there may not have been any documentation prior to college because maybe the student or the family didn't realize that there was a disability, or maybe the disability came on. You can have
Well,
disability caused by, say, a traumatic head injury that happened later on. The other thing is these requirements vary from college to college. So if you're ever on social media and you hear a parent say, "Oh, colleges require this," it is up to the college. So I've had everything from colleges saying it has to be a neuropsych battery and it has to include certain tests, to colleges that say, we'll take whatever you bring us. If it's an old IEP or a 504 or a doctor's letter, just bring in what you have and we'll work with that. So you can't really generalize across the board.
no, and I would say again, just like with SAT and ACT, just check their documentation guidelines as you're doing that research on those different offices at each school. Look and see what their documentation guidelines are. That's the best place to find it.
And it's often right there on the website. But if it isn't, that's something that they can tell you.
And when should you obtain that testing? If you do have to get updated testing or new testing or just testing in general, when should you obtain it? My rule of thumb, or what I like to call the sweet spot, is doing it in case you do need it for SAT or ACT, doing it that's kind of that summer before your junior year. That way it carries you, because usually the colleges, if they do require documentation, they want it to be within usually the last 3 years. Sometimes it's five. We had one college that wanted it within the last 18 months. So everybody's a little bit different, but 3 years is pretty much the standard. So if you do it that summer before your junior year, you're hopefully not going to have to do it again. If you already have the documentation, SAT, ACT have been taken care of, then sometime during your senior year, a lot like what we were talking about earlier with waiting till the last minute. I think it's really important that once you've decided where you're going to go to school, and you've picked your school and you know when you're going to orientation, that is when you set up that time to meet with your disability services office and get your plan put in place. And in order to do that, you may need this documentation. So to have it in your hands by the time you go to orientation, my fear is if students wait until they get to campus in August, September, that's what everyone else is waiting for. And you're going to show up to your first day of class and may not have those accommodations in place yet because you're still on the wait list to get in for an appointment. So get it done over the summer so that when you show up first day of class, you know when you're walking into class, I'm going to get copies of notes. I can go take my test in a quiet place, whatever it is that's on your accommodation list. So
And I would add to that even if you happen to go to a college that says, "Oh, your neuropsych evaluation is 10 years old, we don't care,
we'll
we'll
take
take
it.
that." Even if that's the case, there's other reasons to get updated testing. Maybe you have new diagnoses that weren't caught 5, 6, 7 years ago. Maybe the specific accommodations you're going to need in college um, are going to be better described by somebody who's seeing you as a high school junior or senior than someone who saw you in middle school. They're not going to talk about college accommodations, back then. So there are lots of potential benefits to getting updated testing, and it helps you see what's changed, what kind of progress you've made, etc.
Yeah, learning disabilities don't typically go away, but they do change. It does look different from second grade to 10th grade. So
Yeah. So how do high schools and college differ from when it comes to assessing disability accommodations? Well, accessing disability accommodations, it's really fundamentally different. And this is kind of comes as a shock or a rude awakening sometimes to families, where in high school, K through 12, really, if you are in the special ed system, if you're on an IEP or 504 plan, those accommodations and services kind of happen automatically. They get sort of pushed out. The student arrives at school, the accommodations are built in, the student doesn't even have to know what they are, they just happen. Um, and I find, I've asked students, tell me about your accommodations. They're not always familiar with them. So they are there whether the student asks for them or understands them or not. In college, very different. In college, it falls on the student, not the parents, the student, not the college. So if you don't declare that you have a disability and go to the disability services office and build a list of accommodations with them, you will not get accommodations because they can't read your mind. They don't know that you necessarily have a disability or what kind of accommodations you need. And even once you get that list of approved accommodations from the college, it's quite possible, and it's the case in many colleges, that you are going to have to speak or communicate with every instructor every term to get those accommodations implemented. Now, the upside of that is there might be some courses where you don't need the accommodations. Maybe if it's extra time on tests and it's an art class that doesn't have tests, you don't need to pursue that accommodation. But in many cases, you do have to have those conversations over and over again throughout college. And so students need to be able to speak up and ask for what they need. So how can parents support their students in transitioning from IEPs and 504s to college accommodations, given what I just said? It is building that self-advocacy. It is taking the parent who's in the driver's seat and sort of trading places with the student who's in the passenger seat, metaphorically speaking, although if you're learning to drive, maybe literally speaking as well. So that means saying, okay, this is as a parent, this is what I've done. You need to start coming to the IEP meetings. You can share the meetings. Let's look at your list of accommodations, make sure you understand them. Let's practice having you have these conversations. If you, as the parent, are used to being the advocate for your child with the teachers and the staff at school, get your child involved in that process. You don't always have to jump in and rescue them if they have the ability or can develop the ability to self-advocate. If they can't, there are support programs, summer programs, gap year programs to help them work on these skills. And certainly we are talking with students about this stuff consistently. Quick plug for the Facebook group. If you're joining live through the live stream from the Facebook group, then you already know about it. But it is 26,000 members and growing. It is a great place for parents to just connect with each other, get support from each other, learn about, hey, does anybody know of any camps or summer programs for a student with this profile? Has anybody sent their kid to this college or had experience with the disability services office at this college? Great way for parents to learn from each other and brainstorm together.
And we also have a podcast called Let's Talk Learning Disabilities. We are up to about, I can't believe we're almost around 130 episodes. We've been doing it for a couple of years now. We've got topics on all the learning disabilities, ADHD, executive function. We've talked to lots of different professionals. We talk a lot about college transitioning from high school to college, college disability support services. So feel free to check out the website, or check out the website and check out the podcast. I have found it to be incredibly helpful. Parents find it incredibly helpful. And we're not trying to sell anything. We just are here to help and provide information because it's an overwhelming world out there when you're dealing with learning disabilities and kids transitioning through the different levels of school. And we just want to be there to be a support. So just wanted to know that was out there as a resource. All
So
right.
thanks for hanging there. We would love to hear your questions. Hopefully we've answered some of them already, but what else would you like to know?
So, Jonah, what would be the steps, or Eric, what would be the steps to request those accommodations for freshmen in college? Like what's the
Yeah.
first step?
I can't help at all with that. That's a very Eric question.
Great question from Aida. So again, As with so many things in our field, it depends. The process is specific to the college. I find with the college disability websites, they're usually pretty good about that. Sometimes there's a portal, you go in and there's a form to fill out and it's very straightforward. Typically, you're filling out a form, you are providing the documentation that we've talked about, updated documentation, and often there's a meeting involved where after you've filled out that form and provided your documentation, there's a sit down meeting, maybe in person, maybe virtual, where the student and the disability services staff discuss, okay, what accommodations do you need? Why do you need them? Parents may or may not be welcome at those meetings, so students really need to know their stuff.
Yeah, I 100%.
And as I said before, at many colleges, once you've got that approved list of documentation of accommodations, you still have to talk or communicate with every instructor every term to get those implemented. It's still saying, "Hey, I'm in your class. Here's my list of accommodations. Hope there's no issue with that." Most of the
And if
time, it's straightforward. If there is an issue, you can go back to disability services and say, "Hey, the professor's giving me a hard time about this." Because once in a while, a professor will say, "Oh, I don't do that," or push back. Most of the time, it's straightforward.
you took the words out of my mouth. Um, Deborah, you wanted to know what tests we include in our evaluation. So we do what's called a full psychoeducational evaluation. So we do a full cognitive eval, a full academic eval. We use tests like the Woodcock-Johnson, the Wechsler. We're really looking for any kind of learning disability, processing issue. We do test for attention and focus. Um, and I'm not going to give you the whole laundry list, but you're welcome to reach out. You can email me or give us a call and I can give you some more specifics. But I do feel like we look at it from a little bit different lens because we have more of an education background. So we're looking at how are these things impacting your student on a day-to-day basis in the classroom setting.
There is another question in
The
there.
first one was that I already asked it. It was about the homeschool.
Okay,
I threw that in
right,
there.
right,
Oh,
right, right.
there we go. Oh, wow.
Okay.
Which college in Chicago has great accommodations for ADHD and high functioning autism? Hmm.
So yeah, I'm leery about recommending naming specific colleges in a public forum like this because I'm not here to endorse specific institutions. But again, we have that neurodiversity friendly database on the website. That's topcollegeconsultants.com. It's freely available. You don't have to give me your email address or anything. You can sort it by states. You can see which ones are in Illinois. Again, all colleges, for the most part, by federal law, will provide disability accommodations. But if you're looking for supports and services above and beyond that, like an executive function coach to help your child manage time, or peer mentors, or social skills workshops, or other bells and whistles, that would be a smaller subset of colleges that are listed in that database. But there's certainly some in Illinois.
For sure. We are in private school and they do not have an official IEP 504. So would we just have to go through the school's learning center for documentation? If they have a formal accommodation plan, whoever has put that accommodation plan together would be who you would want to get that from. If they don't have a formal documentation or a formal plan, but they're getting those accommodations in class, then what I would recommend is that you have the teachers document that by writing some type of letter and not just the teachers from this year. Because remember, the history is important. So go back to teachers last year or the year before to show that these accommodations have been given regularly each year. Anything you
And
guys would add to
if
that?
Well, I would just say if you haven't been getting them, then it's more challenging, which is something you mentioned sort of early on. It's that track record of not just having them, but using them. If you didn't need extra time on tests in school, but you're saying to the College Board or ACT, we need them on standardized tests, they're going to look at that and say, well, you didn't need it before. You got through all your other tests. Why do you all of a sudden need it? Looks like you're trying to game the system. Even if you're not, it it doesn't look good. So having that track record or that paper trail, as you said, is key.
I've had parents go back and ask teachers from years past to write letters, and it's been very, it's worked. It's been very helpful because
Yeah.
not every single school offers a formal accommodation plan. A lot of schools have them kind of built in to their day to day. So, yeah, any kind of documentation, it doesn't have to be a formal IEP or a formal 504, just something documented from the school saying that, yeah, I've been getting these accommodations because of my, diagnosed disability, whatever that is.
And
Any other
keep in mind,
questions?
worst case scenario, there's a good chance you can be okay without a test if it comes to that.
This
There
is
are
true.
some colleges that have gone back to requiring tests, standardized tests, absolutely, but many colleges don't. So there's options for everyone. What else do folks want to know?
That's important too. I don't think people realize how many test optional schools are out there. And you just, still assume that no matter where you're going to go to college, you're going to have to take the SAT or ACT. And if you're in a public school right now, you're taking the PSAT. Everyone's taking it.
Hmm.
So you just assume that's something that you're going to have to do. But, being aware
Yeah.
of those schools that are out there that's big, can be really
Or
helpful.
test free. I mean, people don't always
Yeah.
realize that the California public universities do not look at standardized tests, the ACT
Yeah.
and the SAT.
Even if you send one, yeah,
Yeah.
they'll
So
cover
if
their
you're
Really?
like,
lives.
oh, but my score is
Yeah,
so good, it's going to help me. No, not
I
for
don't
the
care.
UCs or the Cal States.
they
That
don't
being
care.
said, most students we work with apply to a range of schools that may include colleges that are test optional or even test required. What else do you want to know about college admissions, testing, accommodations, transition, college
We are
readiness?
here. Well, our contact information will be included in this recording with the notes. We also have some checklists that we'll send out when we send out the recording. So if you registered for the webinar, then you will get a copy of that because we have your email address. Or if you're watching via the live stream, you can send in a request for those as well. But please feel free to reach out to any one of us if you have questions about any of the things that we do or are interested in any of our services. We are happy to help. Jonah,
Yes, ma'am.
do you do all of your test prep virtual or are you in person and virtual?
Yeah, we're hybrid. The other tutors at the company, we run sort of a co-op. They're all over, so they can do in person if you happen to be in Miami or New York or whatever, and I do it here in Charlottesville. But we're 80% virtual right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Eric, you're all virtual?
I am. Yep. My students are all
Where?
over the country.
Okay. Because you're located in,
I'm in California. I'm in the Bay Area, but
that's
I've
right.
also lived in the Northeast and I've toured colleges all over. And my team members are all over the country. So if someone says, we really want somebody who has a deeper knowledge of this area, I've got somebody in Atlanta, somebody in South Carolina, um, Massachusetts, Connecticut. So we are in a number of states, and collectively we have knowledge of a lot of high schools, a lot of colleges, a lot of summer programs, gap year programs.
Can you talk just a minute about the gap year programs? Because I think that's also something that a lot of people aren't aware of what's available out there as far as gap year goes. Now, as far as I'm thinking of for kids that have learning differences or neurodivergent, that year of like skill building. What
Yeah,
can you talk a
that
little bit
so
about what's
if you
available?
yeah, it's completely optional whether you take a gap year or more than 1 year between high school and college. So obviously, some people start college much later in life. And typically, you don't need to make that decision until you have to commit to a college, and that is generally May 1st of senior year, unless you're applying early decision, which is another whole topic. But so even if you're junior or early in senior year and you're not sure if you want to take a gap year or not, you've got time to figure that out. Once you commit to a college, if you want to defer for a year and start a year later, you would need to tell them at that point, and ideally tell them what you're going to do during that year. You can do practically anything during a gap year. You can work and save up money to pay for college, but there are dedicated gap year programs for students with learning differences to help build those skills like time management, self-advocacy, social skills, and we help, students connect to those programs, as well as summer programs. So there's a lot of ways you can get the support and become college ready.
Are those programs that are skill building, are they where kids actually go live on a campus and kind of go through the college routine without the
So
credit,
a
you know?
handful of them are on college campuses, and sometimes you have the option to take one or two courses, sort of a light load, get a little bit
I
of
like
college
that.
credit. Some of them are sort of freestanding, but they might be located near a college where you could still take a course or two at a nearby college. If you're going to get credit during your gap year, that's something, a college credit, you would need to kind of get that approved by the college ahead of time. Because if you just say, "Oh, I'm going to take a gap year and go to a community college and take a bunch of colleges courses cheaply," you then become a transfer student in the eyes of some colleges. So that's something you would discuss in advance. But if it's part of a gap year program, colleges tend to be just fine with that. So yeah, some of them are located on college campuses, some of them are near college campuses, some of them are just freestanding programs.
I'm a big fan of gap year programs.
Just got a question
Um,
from Kim.
Kim, you guys got evaluated by you can we absolutely you can, depending on what you're needing it for. Again, remember it's all about their documentation guideline. So if they have a guideline that states the documentation has to be within the last so many years, depends how many years ago it was that we did it. So I would check with the guidelines and see, and if we need to redo the testing, just give us a call and we can walk you through that. But in some instances, you're going to be just fine with what you have.
I will say,
It's
you didn't talk about fees, but you are, I have talked with you about fees, and I know that you are much more affordable than a lot of the local in-person options that people are looking at. So many cases, people are like, if I have to pay this out of pocket, it's going to be several $1,000s, and that can be pretty daunting.
It is. And it's what's frustrating is so much of it's not covered by insurance. And I think that is what a lot of people are shocked by when they call and are inquiring about testing, because you just would assume that something like this would be covered by insurance, and it's really not. So yeah, we do work really hard to keep our fees. We're well under $2,000. We sit right around 16 to 1800 right now. And so, still a lot of money, but comparatively speaking, we try to keep it
That's
as affordable as
that's
possible.
shockingly good. Yeah, holy cow.
Yeah. I
Well,
mean, the in-person batteries that a lot of people are looking at could be two or three times that.
yeah,
Yeah,
and our in
got
person's a
down the
little bit
street from me
less.
is that. Yeah, wow.
So yeah, for the virtual, just and that's only because we FedEx materials and there's some other additional expenses to cover. But yeah, we do. This is something I've been doing now for I've been doing this now for 20 years privately, and it's always been something that I love to do. And if I can help two students for the price of what someone else is charging for one, I'm good with that. So it's more just my philosophy, and because I think we have an amazing product. It's not that I just want to be able to help more kids. I think that's kind of how we all feel.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
That's why we do what we do. All right. Well, if we do not have any other questions, then I think we're going to call it a night. And I
Well,
appreciate you guys. Thank you guys so much. This is such good information. It never gets old hearing it. And there's always a new group of people that are interested in it as we have kids coming through. Someone's always on their way up.
And in the case of
So
test prep, it's a moving target. It's all changing from year to year. So
100%.
it's, yeah, oh
it's not
man.
month to month. So
Yeah, this year in
Exactly.
particular, it's
Yeah.
like that.
So we appreciate you guys being here, and we appreciate those that you were able to attend. And if you're watching this via the recording, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. We are happy to help.
thank
Yeah,
you.
that's right. Yeah, thanks for
All right,
having me.
all right, guys. Everyone have a great night.
Good night.
Bye.